Hello, everybody. Week 4 office hours. Sorry, there was a just slight change in the set of steps, the interface that we had to follow to get the office hours started, and something threw me off guard. So we have, we're at this point about midpoint through project 1. In terms of lessons, the expectation is that you have really gone into the P2L3. Can you pull up the
Yes.
drive? Yeah, that just to make sure that you're really okay. So that you're really going into P2L3, which is the P threads lesson, and this is what you need in order to really move into the multi-threaded version of the implementation. So at this point, our expectation is that you have gone through the warm-up exercises. You're starting to be more comfortable with the code structure, with the interface, the environment, the project environment. And that in terms of the lessons, you've gotten to a point where you can you can really start focusing on the multi-threaded part of the program. The recommendation is that this week you would have a chance to go through P2L3, and that really the project, you have a couple of more weeks, so you do have time to get to wrap up the single-thread implementation this week, and then go into the multi-thread implementation. Hoban?
Yeah.
Anything?
No, I was just reading this question.
Oh.
Yeah. So the due date, we are about 1.5 weeks from the due date.
What was the question?
Oh, the question is about how do you deal with the situation that the server aborts the transmission of the file in the middle of the transmission. I am not sure we have a test case for this in the test server in Bonnie. I don't think we intentionally abort the file transmission in the middle and then see how the clients behaves. But in this case, I think he asked what call should be made. Like for instance, should you call GFS abort or something else? That's the question.
So, I mean, so for all of the, in general, in terms of the assignment, the programming assignments, there really isn't one single way how you can implement the code. There may be multiple possible implementations. So there's a certain set of files that's recommended or that are expected that you will be able to modify. And then as long as you provide your implementation within those files, that's sort of the first requirement. In terms of where exactly you need to implement some logic, there may be multiple possible options. And so, I'm not sure, just from scanning through the question, whether there is really just one way on where this particular type of situation can be handled. So there may be multiple possible options, and this is going to be the case for the later assignments as well.
Yeah.
Would that,
yeah, we have a test case where the file is not found. The file that the client is looking for is not found. But we don't have a test case where.
No, but this is a legitimate error
yeah.
that the student's asking for. So even
That's
if
right.
there isn't even if there isn't a specific test case, it's something that's an an obvious thing that can happen, that may happen. So if there is a sort of an error on the server side, and so it's but in terms of where exactly it should be implemented, I'm not sure. So maybe if there are any of the other TAs are online, if they can more specifically, I don't have a clear view of if there's any limitation to implement this in one place or another, whether this would prevent something. So if any of the other TAs have a better view, and if they want to comment, that's great. If not, maybe we'll take a look after the office hours and we'll provide some more feedback for that.
If this were a question for the file transmission in general, then it would be like something like transmission failed or socket closed or something like that. Yeah, but
the question is more of exactly where it should be handled in terms of that's more specific to the code framework that they're given, and that's not very clear to me. I don't have a good answer right now, just because it's not clear to me that one particular location would limit them from doing something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just.
So we'll take a look at this, and we'll comment on this after office hours, or if anybody is online that.
Yeah, just something like transmission failed.
Yeah. Okay, they detected the SAN failed, and they then close the socket, and the handler errors they do bad file descriptor. So is that whether it should? Is he's asking whether he should pass a different type of error message?
Yeah, either that, okay. Or what function should you call to handle the error situation?
Yeah. If we have not specified that.
Yeah, when the file is not found, we have a file not found error code for that. We have that.
Yeah, so this would be just an error. Yeah. As if you can distinguish exactly what is the source of the error. If all of a sudden your connection's terminated, whether which one of the possible cases, whether it was a network error or whether it was the server explicitly closed the connection, or the client, the other party, explicitly closed the connection in the middle of the receive. There's no real way how on the other end you can handle that particular type of error.
Yeah, when we test your client, we test your client against our server, which does not have this kind of situation. I think that's why we didn't prepare different error codes for different error situations.
Well, there's certain things that you're now running a controlled experiment in which, if you know how you're triggering the error, but in general, if this error really manifests itself for real, so one end party closing the connection, there is on the other end, there is very little that you can tell other than you're no longer receiving something on that connection, whether the client intentionally closed it or there was some sort of other failure or interruption or anything like that. That's harder to tell. So it wouldn't even make sense for us to expect that you would be in general able to provide some fine-grained information on errors. But we'll follow up. Okay, so we'll potentially we'll confirm and we'll follow up on this question. Double checking.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the other set of questions that, or the other set of errors that have commonly happened with the project, let's see. Oh, just to double check. Just so the,
like one of these.
yeah, it would be just error. Yeah, it would be just error. Okay. Okay. So in general, in terms of kind of providing some information, so what would be helpful when you run into any kind of failure, anything that you cannot, that you have troubles deciphering exactly what's going on, some of the things that can happen that would be helpful is if you provide a little bit more information. When are these error messages generated? So, for instance, there is a question. I have having two types of failure with GF server, and I'm not sure if they're related. Sometimes they pass, sometimes they don't. But if you go into a little bit deeper into describing the problem, sort of what's the input that what are the specific conditions when these failures get generated, that would help, so one can narrow things down. Is this when you're running on? Can you just from the error messages?
Yeah, I'm guessing this one is from the test case that tests the file not found condition. So when your server detects this condition, file not found condition, it is supposed to return a file not found instead of something else, like instead of an error or something else. So that's the reason that why you are seeing this error message. So you need to code your server such that it returns a file not found if the file is not found.
Okay, so one of the things, actually, I think that the second one's a little bit more obvious. So one of the things that happens, so this is that same question. So one of the things that happens is, this is something that we talked about maybe a couple of weeks ago. When you have a short file, what can happen is that your header and the file end up getting sent in a single buffer, right? Or actually end up getting received on the other side, on the client side. The client's the one that's expecting the response. They end up getting received in a single buffer. So your client was maybe expecting that it would receive first in one receive operation the header, and then in another receive operation the file, but the way that both the header and the short file got packed together on the kind of by the TCP protocol stack, they ended up populating a single buffer, so they're in the same receive. So that's Tony's message that the client's waiting for data, but the server has sent everything. So right, so the way you've coded your client is doing a receive, and it's expecting that first receive is going to just get the header, and then it's trying to do the second receive, but the second receive, there's nothing to be received just because everything was populated by the client, by the server. So that's the problem of the second message. What's the thing?
Yeah, I think that was the reason.
Okay.
I think this is the case where the client is waiting on the socket call receive, and then it's blocked waiting because there's no nothing coming from the servers.
Mhm.
And then eventually the testing framework kills the process like after some time, like after, I don't know, after a minute or so, and then returns a timeout.
Mhm. Okay, so I think that
Yeah,
those were,
both of
yes,
them
okay,
were
so both
answered,
of those were answered. The question about project 2, so project 2 is going to be the extra credit, more of an essay type of Q&A type of project. So we're planning that for next week. And in the later part of next week, we'll release that assignment. So that it would kind of be overlap with some of project 2 and some of project 3 in terms of menu. But it will be an extra credit option. And for project 2, we don't, for, in terms of grading and the drop dates, you can expect that your midterm exam in project 1 will be graded by the drop date. And I think the drop date is like March 14, something like that. Yes, March 14, but there's no expectation that, so for project 2, we're not going to be able to guarantee that project 2 will also be graded by the time the drop date happens. So that's what you can expect. So let me see. So next week, so it's content-wise, the extra credit, it's related to P2L5. So it will be really tail end of next week to overlap with the P2L5 module. So where's the question? Which one was that? Tab.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Tony. So to overlap with P2L5. Okay, so one of the things that we did not talk about are what are some of the, do we talk about common bugs?
Briefly last week. Yes.
For multi-thread case also?
I think we mostly focused on the single threaded case.
Okay. So just see what. Okay, so let me just briefly comment. There are, I've not posted yet. I will post the T-Square friendly version of some of the sample exams. So I will do that, and hopefully that will clarify some of the exam related broad questions that have appeared online. So this would be the sample questions that will just be converted into a T-Square friendly format. Okay, so common questions, common errors with the second part of the assignment. So you'll be wrapping up the single thread version of the assignment. I guess once you've implemented the 2 parts, the echo and the file transform, the biggest challenge will be just to make sure you're comfortable to the code structure that's provided to you as part of the assignment. So figuring out exactly where certain callbacks happen, that would be the biggest part.
And then the protocol, the get files protocol.
Right, yeah. And then incorporating that in the get file protocol. So some of the, like for instance, the error messages are
is a part of the protocol.
This is part of the, yeah. So part of the, and the reason that we are a little bit more precise on exactly on the protocol is so that we can make the testing process a little bit more scalable, right? Because I think without having more details and exactly, or having an agreement on the protocol that can be followed, then it becomes harder for us to interchange what can we test with. There's been a question in the past from students whether it's okay for you to do some kind of to share your binaries with your peers for testing purposes, so that maybe you can debug your implementation in that way. Binaries are okay. So and this is another reason why sticking with a specific protocol should help in that case. So that you can use your friend's server to check whether your client's behaving correctly and can be understood by that server, etc.
There's a Piazza thread for that.
Mm-hmm.
Piazza post for that.
Yeah. The in terms of the single thread implementation, I think the getting used to some of the expectations of what exactly happens during the file transfer because of the TCP connection, the error messages, and just in general getting used to the code structure. Those have probably been the main issues that have come up. Yes,
following the protocol, correctly following the protocol, and then the socket issues. You need to get ready for. You need to handle the socket underrun, overrun.
Making sure that the socket number can be reused, sort of those sorts of things.
Oh yeah,
that we didn't talk about now. That's, it's been a common. The socket needs to be configured the right way with the right options so that it can be reused across connections. Otherwise, the system takes some time to sort of collect the numbers and allow the socket to be reused.
Yeah, Linux kernel still maintains the dead processor's socket ID, just in case something happens in the near future. It is just to follow the TCP/IP protocol to make sure that the close operation is handled correctly.
So the data does not get delivered to another process, right?
But there is a socket option that you can override that behavior, so that when a new process is created and uses the connection, you can just override. Okay, I'm just gonna ignore that part, and then I'm just gonna reuse this port again. So that's the socket reuse option.
So in terms of the multi-threaded option, some of the new types of problems that students have commonly ran into have been things like not properly using synchronization. So we talked last class about our expectations of what are the types of problems, what are the types of behaviors that are versus aren't acceptable. So the case, for instance, where you are serializing the execution of your threads because you are holding clocks across the entire execution, that's not acceptable. That's one common problem that has come up and that has been raised as an error message with from the testing framework, that there is a performance problem. The cases where you're asking for all the threads are trying to access the same file, so that's another problem that has come up. What else is there?
So locking the code and locking the code and not locking the file, maintaining a local file pointer if you are, just in case you are accessing the same file by multiple threads. So maintaining a local file pointer will solve the problem. Locking granularity should be as fine as can be, otherwise your performance will suffer.
So when you move, as you move into the multi-threaded, and some of you may do so over the weekend, for instance, one of the things to keep in mind is, again, there are certain files that you can modify in order to get to the multi-threaded version, and what that will imply will be that you may need to change within the scope of those files, right? You may need to change things like the return value of some functions in order to be able to incorporate them, to use them as a procedure which gets passed as an attribute when you're creating a thread. So, for instance, that would be one thing, right? So you may need to restructure your code in some way. And again, there isn't necessarily just one single way, but you may need to make some changes so that you can go from the single thread implementation to transform the single thread implementation into a multi-thread implementation where your threads are created in such a way that they can execute the appropriate handler code, for instance.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah, I think that the bigger set of challenges for in this project are primarily related to the just basic programming, being comfortable programming. One of the things that has helped a lot, the way that the current version, I think, has been structured to have you already have a lot of the BOSS workers implementation as part of the skeleton that you're given, right?
Yeah.
I think that in terms of having to code in general, one of the things that or starting from scratch with this kind of project, sometimes students have struggled as to how to, in general, partition the processing, what happens in a BOSS, what happens in the worker, how should the two communicate in terms of the queue structure and the synchronization. But I think that you're already given too many building blocks for this that, in a way, both limit your flexibility, but also give you a bigger starting point, so you don't have to come up with a design of all aspects. I guess the callbacks are one thing that's a little bit different than than maybe what some students are used to, depending on your experience. But I think probably other than that,
Yeah, callbacks. And you can think of callbacks as they're just functions that gets called by the framework at the right moment in the right order. So you need to fill. It's like the fill in the blank code writing. So the callbacks are called when the condition is triggered. And we talk about the queue, the work queue. The queue is provided by the skeleton code, but it is not thread safe. So it's okay for you to use it in your single-threaded code, but in your multi-threaded code, you will have to make sure that somehow it is protected when it is accessed concurrently. So that's a part of your job.
And that's the place where it's important that you protect the access to the queue and serialize only that portion, as opposed to serialize the whole part of just residing in the queue, running the request, and then exiting the queue. So the entire process. Make sure that we brought up earlier already. Especially for when testing on Bonnie, keep your debugging output under control, just because there is a limit to how much Bonnie will tolerate, and I think that and be aware that it makes perfect sense that you will see completely different types of errors when you're testing on your local machine versus when you're testing in Bonnie, because it's a completely different environment, and different types of interleavings of events can occur in the two environments, and that will trigger different messages. Did you see anything anywhere else?
The TAs were encouraging students to post questions on Piazza, because it's easy to be buried in the chat.
Yeah, the Piazza questions are kind of because this is one of the downsides of the one of the challenges that we have to deal with in the program. There isn't sort of one magic technology out there that really incorporates all the features that we want. So we use multiple technologies, right? We have Piazza. There are, for certain things, the TAs and many of the students like to use the Slack channel. We run the office hours through YouTube Hangouts with the live chat option. So what we've established in the class is that the content, really, Piazza is the main medium that if there is an official announcement that's related to the course, you're expected to really follow Piazza, because there may be a course and related announcement that will be posted on Piazza. We don't have a classroom, so that is the classroom. So, and in terms of questions for things like office hours, when they're in Piazza, they're more easily associated with the office hours thread, and it's easier to find where those questions were. Of course, if you put a question on some of the other channels, yes, you can copy paste question and answer, and some of the TAs can alert to those. And then similarly, if you're finding any of the other channels more easy in terms of how quickly it is to get information, if you have your problem resolved there, and if you find that was particularly useful, it would be great if you can capture that and contribute it to the Piazza discussion, or help some other student that may have raised the Piazza question. The TAs know that if there's something repeated that's happening there, to also pass that information, and similar things. For certain types of requests, we can resolve certain types of requests through public comments, or types of questions through public comments, and kind of sharing enough of information about the test case, what was happening, or what happened.
I just removed tentative.
Oh, did I put that?
I think so.
Oh, it was probably something that.
Yeah, I just deleted tentative.
Oh, it was probably some autocomplete.
Okay.
And then there's some other types of questions that may be harder to resolve in that way, and so we need for those, you can always put a private post. Yeah, sorry, I did not realize. I guess there was a tentative office hour situation. One of the previous semesters. It was just an autocomplete.
Okay.
Did not see it. So, yeah. What else do we have? Okay, so project 1, you should be really jumping into pthreads and already thinking about the multi-threaded version. We told you some of the typical problems. Project 2 next week, but more like later part of next week, as you are getting, as the expectation is that you're getting into P2L5. We'll also give you information about some sample T-square based midterm questions, so you can get a sense of what T-square is like. And then you should be getting some information about the onboarding from us soon. So it's not going to come from us. What's going to happen is that the current class roster will be communicated with Proctor Track, the company that's doing the proctoring for the exams. And if you don't have one already, an account will be created for you, and all of you will be invited to take the proctoring exam, on the onboarding exam for Proctor Track. That's really going to make sure that you have some experience what the process looks like, and B, there's some compatibility test that will be run against your machine. So those are some of the things that you can expect for immediate term. I think that over the next couple of office hours, we'll talk a little bit more about the midterm exam and potentially some of the it's just TAs, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a TA channel. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can expect to hear more about the midterm exam and the next set of assignments. Okay. Okay. So the next lesson, next week. For the lesson, there are a couple of papers that are recommended, that are not actually recommended, they're required. And as I said earlier in the semester, for the required, for the assigned reading in terms of the papers that you're expected to read, there are some portions, some subsections, some sections of those texts that really are not discussed in the video, so you're really not responsible for those. But these are the old papers that these are older papers, and they are the first papers that kind of outline what it is, what's required from an operating system to support threads, and from a user level library. So to support threads both at the operating system level and also to support threads at the user space level. So to support a user level threading library. In some parts, they're in some aspect, they're the early version, ultimately what led to the current version of pthreads. They're predecessors of the current, from a semantic perspective, the current implementation of the POSIX threads. When you go through that lesson, when you look at those papers, one of the things that you will learn will be, if you start from an environment in which you had a single-threaded kernel, started with a single-threaded kernel supporting single-threaded applications. And then we went, single-threaded kernel supporting multi-threaded applications. And then we arrived at a multi-threaded kernel supporting multi-threaded applications. But it was to a degree, it was incremental of how we added new capabilities, introduced new data structures, extended the existing data structures, introduced new abstractions, right? So we went through this process, and what's interesting about these two papers is, some of the pretty complicated gymnastics that had to be done in order for the kernel to have some idea of what the heck's happening at the user level with, not just multiple applications, but multiple threads within an application. And so how do you make a good decision when you have so little visibility in terms of what are the requirements of your workload? And the other way around, from the user space library level, how do you make sure that you can communicate with the operating system what your requirements are, and how do you make sure that, to avoid scenarios where you kind of completely end up with some inefficient decisions, resource management decisions, scheduling decisions, or whatever. And so, what the outcome of that was, system calls, so that the user level can tell the kernel or can request from the kernel something else, some new signals, so that basically from the OS we have a mechanism to export some information into the user space library, and as I said, some new data structures, new abstractions. And then, enters Linux, and so all of this work was already done, and so they really had a chance to kind of think through of, oh well, what were the, what are some of the things that are hard regarding how what the design is for multi-threading, for multiprocessing, given the support that's there in, for instance, in the Solaris kernel. And so it was easy at that point to say, well, if I sort of went back and completely redesigned certain types of mechanisms from scratch, you end up designing for with all of this additional insight from papers such as the two that are the recommended, the required papers with next lecture that are associated with next lecture. It becomes much more easy to arrive at a system design that's simpler, that's more elegant, and that doesn't have some of the complications that are described in those papers and in the next lecture, in the P2L4 lecture, whether it's next video or not, that's separate. So that's just to give you a little bit of heads up on what you will be reading about. In terms of some of the other things, and just quickly scroll through some of these extra topics. I'm going to talk about that next week, actually. So, okay. This is the question that came on officers. Okay. All right. So, are there? So, if there aren't any other, this one. You're this is upside down as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Or scroll.
Yeah. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, we'll wrap things up for this week, and then next week.
The CY. I don't think C, not E, no E.
Oh.
Okay, no.
Well, hold on.
Oh,
Hold on.
okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Actually, it's a separate. Yeah, that's a separate question. Okay. All right. So we will we'll do that separately, Alex. So we'll wrap up the officers today. Sorry that TS are alerting us to something, but we'll handle that separately. If there are no more live questions that are coming in, if there is anything that's related to today's office hours that we didn't clarify, or if we end up confusing you about something, please add questions to the post, and then we'll get back to those. I think that the first question may have also been resolved if Hogan and I misinterpreted it, but I think that what the student was asking was about the error message plus where it should go. Okay, thanks a lot, and we will see you next Monday, right?
Bye.
Bye.